I'm really delighted to welcome a man who said that his entire career and ambition since the age of 25 has led him to take up the new role that he finds himself in. Stephen Parkinson's had a stellar career in law as both prosecutor and defender. He's worked on a string of high-profile cases, advising Tony Blair at the Hutton inquiry, representing Rebecca Brooks at the phone hacking trial. He also acted for Margaret Thatcher, John Major, and Michael Heseltine at the BSE inquiry. But he takes up this long-coveted role as DPP at a crisis point for the criminal justice system that we have talked about for the last day and a half. The backlog for cases for the Crown Courts is now running at 65,000 and rising. It prompted one lawyer this week to describe as a motorway gridlock of human misery. 3 chief constables this year went public saying the CPS needs reforming, not fit for purpose. The relationship between the former DPP and some of the senior officers here has been strained, to say the least. And another report claimed that the CPS is driven by a woke agenda. I'm sure lots of you will have questions for Stephen Parkinson, so you know how to do it after a day and a half. Keep them coming. And it is quite an intro, isn't it, Stephen Parkinson? Your first interview in this role. Are you daunted by it?
Can I say, first of all, and I will answer that question, how grateful I am actually to have the opportunity to come along to the conference today. As I think many of you will know, I'm 2 weeks in post. But I'm really glad that this is my first major public event. And the reason I'm glad is because I'm addressing an audience which is obviously hugely important to the Crown Prosecution Service. I've heard about the need to reset relationships and the perceptions that there have been around the Crown Prosecution Service. What I want to say to all of you is that I am very keen indeed to be working closely with you, personally, individually. But I do know there is that willingness within the CPS, and whatever the relations might have been at national level, actually I know they're very good at a local level. And so I want to really build out of that. We'll probably almost certainly go into some of the detail of some of these things. So I'll give you quite a brief answer to your question around whether I'm daunted or not. Can I say, and I don't want to sound naive, but actually I'm quite excited. As you've already heard, this is a job I've wanted since the beginning of my career. And so obviously part of my excitement is that I now have the opportunities that I've always wanted. But also because I am fully aware of those challenges, and I've got some very firm views about the state of the criminal justice system, which I know will be shared by everyone in the room. But I also see a big opportunity for all of us, actually. There's lots of really good work going on. There's a huge level of commitment within the police, but also in the Crown Prosecution Service, and a shared sense of purpose. And I think that one of the things we need to do is just build out of that to achieve things together. And obviously it's been a common theme, hasn't it? One other thing I'll just say by way of introduction. Yes, I have been a defence solicitor for 20 years. So I've become quite well known, not just to this community here, but to the wider legal profession. And I've been heartened by the sense of goodwill that has followed me into this post. And the universal feedback was that it's just a sensible appointment. I hope I can demonstrate that that goodwill has got a basis behind it. And I should probably just shut up now.
Well, there's so much to talk about that you've already alluded to. So, I mean, let's just get stuck straight in, Stephen. One of the biggest areas of tension is around charging.
Yeah.
3 senior officers, 3 chief constables earlier this year said that the police, rather than the CPS, should have the power to charge suspects in most cases. Now, your predecessor pushed back very firmly against that. Will you move on it?
I'm not 2 weeks into post going to be giving commitments of that substance. I've spoken to 2 of the 3 chief constables this morning. I was delighted to be able to do so. I've also spoken to Mark Rowley actually last week, and Gavin Stevens, Rob Nixon. So we're starting to build build these relationships. I do think, actually, that some of the tensions that may have developed in the past have been around the absence of the personal relationships that I would like to build. I don't think it's necessary. I can understand the frustration that has led the police, perhaps in the past, to ventilate their concerns. But I think the right way going forward, certainly, is to have... I really liked that phrase that James cleverly talked about, when he talked about challenge without conflict. And I absolutely, I endorse that. I don't mind challenge. Actually, I welcome challenge. Because I think that complex problems are best dealt with people with different perspectives. So really, I do welcome these conversations. We can get into charging, but I think lots of people know what I'm going to say, which is that there is an interrelationship between charging and file quality, case build. These are the most serious cases that the criminal justice system has to deal with. If we rush through to charging when we're not prepared, it increases the potential that things will go wrong at a later stage, that the cases will get derailed, because you're immediately into a court timetable. And at best maybe delay, but at worst, we don't get the cases home. And we have a joint objective, all of us in this room, to deliver justice for victims and for society at large. And if that means we have to take a little bit more time to get those cases right, then I think that's what we need to be doing.
But sorry to interrupt,
okay.
But one of the things, and I know because we'd had a conversation earlier about this, that the victim attrition is one of the things that you are keen to focus on as one of your key priorities. But these chief constables are saying the delays, because they can't go to charging, cause terrible stress for victims and suspects who may have been wrongly accused. This is part of victim support and care, isn't it? Being able to progress these cases. I mean, some of the charging rates now are so low. You can imagine the pressure that's putting people under, and the police having to negotiate that with victims who then become disillusioned, drop out of the service, and are not getting justice.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to name two main priorities, it would be reducing delay in the criminal justice system and victim attrition. I think in both cases that's entirely unacceptable. I really do. I'm never going to resist. It's going to be one of my key messages as I go on, that we've got to do something about this.
But they're sort of offering to help with the challenge, aren't they, by doing that?
They are. I mean, on domestic abuse, which is one of the topics that we've been talking about, we're working on a joint justice plan. We're going to be delivering that in the future. Already there are 10 pilots going on, which are giving police the ability, without reference to the CPS, to impose conditional cautions. The condition being that people undertake a course which addresses the problems with domestic abuse. So, and the idea is that next year, as a result of the Domestic Abuse Act, the police will have that power going forward. So that isn't charging, but that is out-of-court disposals. What I'll just say on, if I may, on domestic abuse. So research that I've read, and by the way, I've said to my new colleagues, you can flood me with information about domestic abuse. I really want to understand about it. It's 20% of what you do, it's 20% of what we do. But my understanding is that it takes 50 episodes of violence on average before a victim reaches out to the police. And I'm also told by those groups that represent victims of harm that if that encounter isn't dealt with in the way that the victim expects, they're never going to come back. So sometimes, and that's really dangerous in cases where domestic violence is escalating. And so sometimes it's not simply a question simply of charging someone. Sometimes it's a question of when we go to court, we've got the right support for the victim going forward. So we apply for the protective orders that victims need. So we put a context around them in which we prevent reoffending. That's one of the reasons that we've asked, we want to keep hold of charging, so that we can equip the court with the information they need to put in place the support that victims need. I hope that makes sense.
So it doesn't look as though there may be wiggle room on that at this stage from what you're saying.
Well, 2 weeks in, I'm listening. I've obviously had a lot of information given to me. This is my understanding. If I'm wrong on this, if there are things to say to us about it, then we're obviously willing to listen. And we are working on the joint justice plan on domestic abuse. So it's not finalised yet, so there's plenty of room for discussion.
I mean, it's a good point at which just then to look more broadly at the court system. I mean, when you look at the backlog, it's horrifying for victims to contemplate. It's no wonder that the newly appointed Victims Commissioner, reappointed very recently, Baroness Newlove, she released a new survey. More than a third would not report a crime to the police again. Only 61% said that they would attend court again. That's, however many that wouldn't. 8% felt they could receive justice by reporting a crime. I mean, we are in dire states here. We haven't got the judges, we don't have the barristers, particularly in serious cases of serious sexual offending and rape.
Yes, and in fact, in terms of counsel, it's a particular problem with RASO cases. They're coming away from our panels rather than joining our panels. I would very much like to meet Baroness Newlove. I saw the report. I'm entirely in sympathy with her. I mean, there are things that we are doing. I can talk about those if you like. But I want to face into what you're saying and say I'm determined to do what we can to address it.
But I suppose what's interesting is that how much can you actually do when there is a question about getting a whole raft of new lawyers trained up, judges that can sit, courts that have the capacity to deal with a backlog like this? I mean, how much can you practically do in this role to confront some of those challenges?
Well, I should say, and sometimes public perception is a little bit behind the reality. We had, by the way, we do need more resources, but we had a good spending settlement. We've recruited 1,000 new prosecutors in the last year. We're nowhere near, we're heading towards, but we certainly haven't reached where we were in 2010. So we are getting more resources. But there's two other points I'd like to land. First is that there's this project called the Better Case Management Project, which has been headed by the senior presiding judge, where the police, the CPS, the bar, the courts, we're all working together to address this question of delay. I think it's got a huge amount of potential, and a lot of what we're doing, including through the national charging model, is designed to reduce delay by being more efficient. But can I make one of my sort of big points that I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about? And you refer to the fact that I've been in private practice. So I've been a lawyer, but I've also been responsible for a business. And businesses only keep going if they're profitable, and that means they need to be efficient. And so I've learned a lot about improving processes. And when I talk about, the big opportunity, which I did a few minutes ago, I think one of the big opportunities is for us all to sit down and talk about how we can improve processes. I'm going to be starting to do that pretty quickly, actually, in the Crown Prosecution Service. I think there are opportunities to remove duplications, streamline processes, remove the sort of workarounds that people engage in because the system isn't working for them. There's a lot we can do with technology, but as I said to our head of IT, let's actually get our working practices in the way that we want them, and then we can build the IT out of that. Now, I'm sure that's true for the CPS, but I'm pretty sure it's true for the criminal justice system as a whole. And I can give examples as we go along. It's not going to be a headline in the Daily Mail, but in terms of driving through real improvement, reducing delay, I think it's got considerable potential.
Can I ask you about impartiality? There have been a lot of questions about the impartiality of the police, which we've touched on in the last day or so. There have been serious questions raised about the impartiality of the CPS too. Is it impartial? You've been quoted as previously voicing support for Black Lives Matter, for example. There was a report from the Policy Exchange think tank claiming the CPS had been unduly influenced by Stonewall, for example. Is it impartial?
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. And to be honest, I'm not going to apologise for the fact that the Crown Prosecution Service is listening to communities. I mean, I've been here all morning. It's been really interesting. And of course, there's a lot of engagement that goes on between the police and communities, and also the Crown Prosecution Service and communities. We absolutely need to listen to the experience of people who are not the same as us. But the decisions that we make are for us. And that's the distinction that I want to draw. And just in case a Daily Telegraph leader writer is listening to this, because I've been accused of being woke and captured, and I want to just say something about Black Lives Matter. I wrote a blog 3 weeks after the murder of George Floyd. Subsequently, we learned a lot more about Black Lives Matter as an organisation, with which I completely disagree. I mean, they talked about defunding the police. The reason I dealt with him in that blog was because what they were doing, through the good work they were doing, was shining a light on the disparity that our ethnic communities experience and also feel. And I wanted to come out as an ally in my firm and to give my firm the resources they needed to understand that and to support their colleagues. I will always do that. I will champion diversity in the Crown Prosecution Service. I'm not embarrassed to say that, because we talk about bringing our whole selves to work. I don't particularly like slogans because I think they can start to lose their meaning. But I understand what that means. And I know that people can give up their best if they don't need to hide or pretend about the person that they are. So yes, I champion diversity and I will listen to these groups, but I will always make my own decisions, and the CPS will make our own decisions independently.
Very keen to get some of your questions. I know I'll ask for you to raise your hands in a moment as well, but you know the way to do it by now on this little tablet that I've got, a couple of them coming in. One of your predecessors potentially could be Prime Minister by this time next year. You called him an average DPP.
Yeah.
Who was, and I quote, over-reliant on the advice of others, and that he had no in-depth experience of prosecuting. What sort of Prime Minister do you think he might make?
Obviously very good at adapting to new situations. Look, you won't be surprised to hear I've changed my view.
Have you been listening to the advice of others, DPP?
I have been listening to others. Actually, I've been listening to others who had much better experience, greater in-depth experience than I had. Look, that was my last hurrah as the senior partner of a medium-sized city firm based on very limited experience of working on cases that I knew he was involved in. I've had many conversations over the last couple of weeks with people who know Keir Starmer much better than me, and who worked with him over the 5-year period that he was DPP. And I can tell you that within the CPS, he's respected, liked, and admired, and is regarded as having been a very successful DPP. So thank you for the question, because I'm actually very glad to take the opportunity to correct what I said. And I think it may help, because I think we're going to be meeting each other quite soon.
Get that in there quickly. We've got some questions coming in that I'm going to get cracking with. What makes you tick? Tell me something about Stephen Parkinson that you haven't shared potentially in a forum like this before. I mean, it's up to you how far you want to go with that, obviously. But it's always good in introductory moments like this to know who you are. You're clearly very ambitious, massively career-focused, given that, I mean, you've dealt with some of the most high-profile cases. I mean, when you're not doing that, who are you?
I'm not sure there is any other person, to be honest. Yeah. I said, so I stepped away from Kingsley Napley at the end of April. And as I said to a couple of friends shortly afterwards, do you know what? you may have some fantasies around retirement, but it's not everything it's cracked up to be. In fact, I always did intend to continue work, although I have to say at that time I didn't expect to be doing this. There's a lot I could say. I think I'm going to say something about ambition, actually, since you've referred to my ambition. For the first 20 years of my career, every post that I took, every post I was offered, I took with a view to taking on this role one day. And it got to the point in 2003 when I was shortlisted to become Director of the Serious Fraud Office, but I failed to get it. I was in my mid-40s. I was intensely ambitious. And I reacted disproportionately to that failure. I was disproportionately upset. And then, you know, it was the cause for me to go into private practice. Every time the DPP post has come up in the last 20 years, and that's 3 times before this, I've been approached to apply for it. And I didn't apply for it. And the reason was because I discovered the importance of, or rediscovered the importance of loyalty to my firm. I thought it would damage them if I were to leave. So now I was in a position to apply for the job, and I have. And if I ever say this, I think I've now got the maturity and the experience to do the job in a way that probably I wouldn't have done 20 years ago. Because now I just want to do the best job that I can. There's no ego here. This will be my last job. I have got ambition, but my ambition is solely aligned with doing a really good job. I don't care. Do you know, if someone says that in 5 years' time, who's the DPP? And he was, I don't know. I'd be delighted because it's not about me. And maybe 20 years ago it was. So I hope that answers your question.
That's very candid. It's very candid. Thank you. Well, I think you've got quite a lot of challenges to come. Let's get stuck into some of these questions. John Cummins has got a question here. We've heard of a CPS prosecutor who's not spoken to a police officer for 3 years. How can this be, and how can policing and the CPS work close together? It goes absolutely to the heart of what we started on.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. And, you know, I heard that this morning, and, of course, I was as disappointed as you are. And that's not the way things should be. Things that I think are getting better. I mean, lots of you will know about the national charging model that's rolling out. And alongside that, better communication is happening. Early conversations around advice. I know you all hate having these bits of paper coming towards you. It is so much better to have a face-to-face conversation. Post-charge conferences are happening, surgeries are happening. There is a practical issue that around all this, which is it's a pragmatic thing. It's around shift patterns and the fact that police officers are often away from their desk. And I know this as a prosecutor, but also as a defence lawyer. And often, you know, when I was defending, it would be email exchanges with the police officer. But we do have the technology which enables us to have those face-to-face conversations where we can. But can I put in a plug, just in case we never get to it? And it's so good to hear the Chief Constable for Bedfordshire earlier today talking around backroom support. And I do want to talk about, just for a moment, if I may, about criminal justice units. When I was
questions about that, actually. Sorry to interrupt the flow, but we have got a couple of questions. Well, then,
yeah. I won't deal with that now. Yeah. But I'm just going to say, John, I think that's the way forward. I mean, there's always a question around, you know, practical issues, preventing those conversations, and there's always a question around resources as well. But I was horrified by that example.
Kim Morris touched on that. How do you aim to strengthen relationships between the CPS and police and promote a more flexible, collaborative approach? I'm sorry, I'm just going to get my eye on the right question. If capacity was achieved, we would see CPS lawyers sitting in police stations working together to improve outcomes. We've seen this work positively before, and from the conversation that we had prior to this meeting, that's something that I know you've got your eye on.
Definitely closer collaboration. I know co-location has worked in the past. But I think the world has moved on a bit. And so we don't have so many people in offices these days. Even when we've done surgeries, actually, there haven't always been people around. Without absolutely endorsing the importance of face-to-face time and that sort of collaboration, it may be that we need to approach the problem in a slightly different way, I think.
Okay, hands up, anybody who'd like to pose a question from the floor? Otherwise, I'll stick to this. Gentleman here at the table at the front, thank you. Just get the microphone to you so people online can hear as well. If you'd just like to introduce yourself, thank you.
It is afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester. I'm the third of the Chief Constables
you are indeed.
Had lunch with. You lucky chap. I'll grab you afterwards.
I was hoping we might have a word.
We could share a thimble of food upstairs. Firstly,
separate conversation.
Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
your appointment to what is, of course, a very substantial position. I wish you the very best of luck. My question is, you may think I was going to go on about charging on the basis that I do think there's perhaps a role for, particularly in terms of summary offences, to perhaps look afresh at the balance between charging decisions. I do think there's a role for policing to be able to take a whole heap of volume crime stuff out without risking our overcharging on the basis of bad decisions and then clogging up the system and having to sort it all out after the fact. So that I put to one side. I think the issue about processes is one thing I really picked up on what you said. I think there's a lot of merit in that. I suspect that there's an awful lot of the CPS trying to make the most efficient use of its resources at the moment, but sometimes efficiency taken to an extreme can be the enemy of effectiveness. And I suspect we've a lot of prosecutors working from home on laptops who are inaccessible. And as a result, what we end up with is frustration, suboptimal processes, demand shifting between systems, whereby sometimes I think for people to make sense of their workload, they create an action plan which they send back to police officers. I know that on occasions some of my people have had as many as 9 action plans around something that should be a fairly simple construct. So it's in the spirit of, and we do, notwithstanding my broader criticism, we do actually have very good relationships with our Chief Crown Prosecutor, and we work as well as we can. But go back to your point about processes. How practically do we come together and really sort of have a fresh look at this, where efficiency meets effectiveness and we reduce frustration?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the way you put it. And I know, because I met them, that you have got an excellent relationship with your Chief Crown Prosecutor. I think that we need to sit down, the police and the CPS, and work through these things together. Of course, I understand the frustration around getting nine bits of paper, where the feeling is that we could have dealt with this much more quickly. I'll make an observation, actually, which is based on my experience of leading teams. It's probably a generational thing. I suspect you and I are much more comfortable about picking up a phone than people in their 20s. I left the firm relatively recently because I did carry on working, and really quite difficult situation involving a young lawyer, and he was going to send an email. I said, pick up the phone, have the conversation, build the relationship. Don't send the email, because first of all, it's going to prolong it. They're going to ping pong. There's probably an awful lot of ping ponging going on. Anyway, he did do that, and of course he made much greater progress. I think we have to all of us actually teach perhaps the younger generation about the merits of speaking to people directly. I was speaking to Mark Rowley last week about some of these issues. There's lots of better over the last 20 years, I have to say, coming back in. But he was saying, and I agree, there seems to be, there's more complexity. I read a really thoughtful paper put together by the NPCC in July around the policing perspective. Really thoughtful. I'd like to have some conversations around that and the joint challenges that we do have. So there's definitely more complexity.
There was a bit of an unseemly moment between your predecessor and Sir Mark Rowley, wasn't there? I mean, he said the CPS was cherry-picking cases.
Yeah, he did.
He pushed back as firmly on that as your predecessor would.
I'll come to that. Can I just finish the point I was making? I know I can go on a bit. I just want to say, I think that probably the criminal justice system over the last 20 years have invented processes which met the need at the time, but we need to examine whether we still need that form, whether we still need that process. And actually, this is why I talk about continuous improvement and an end-to-end look at everything we're doing, just to be absolutely sure that these processes we put in, we still need. On cherry-picking, well, obviously I don't agree that we cherry-pick. We do turn back about 25% of the cases that are sent to us. If there's a chance that we can make a case work, then obviously we should. But it's never been my experience that prosecutors do that. And as a defence lawyer, I would have been saying they charge far too many cases.
Okay, I'm going to go a couple of questions on my tablet here. For Steve Turner, how do you see your role in promoting the important link between the CPS and local criminal justice boards? And then a second question, I'm going to bundle a couple together because this is the APCC conference too. What's your view on the role of PCCs in overcoming the challenges in the criminal justice system? So the first one was from Steve Turner, the second one from A.B. Birkinshaw.
Well, and there is a link between both, isn't there? Because it's about implementing at a local level decisions that have been made nationally. And I think they're critically important. Actually, I've already started to have conversations about this with one or two people today. Because here we are, sitting in Whitehall, devising these wonderful plans. But the reality is that unless people own these locally, own them in the sense of understand and agree with them and then commit themselves to implementing them, then we won't bring about the change that we need. Which is why local criminal justice boards are important. Obviously, PCCs are important as well. And that collectively, somehow, in this vast collective organisation, which is the criminal justice system, we can get behind our shared objectives. And actually, by stating that, I'm not saying I think it's impossible. You do surveys in the police force. We do surveys within government. We're just about to get the results of the CPS survey, the annual survey. But 70%, about 70% of people in the Crown Prosecution Service are really proud of the organisation that they work for and have a strong sense of purpose around it. And that's not just the lawyers, actually. That's everyone. It's the press officers. It's the paralegals. It's the corporate support. Within the CPS, there's that strong sense of purpose. Even though it's an organisation that sometimes is greatly criticised. I'm sure it's the same for the police as well. Maybe one of the things we do need to rediscover, it's very interesting to hear the talk about the fracturing of relationships as a result of austerity. And I think we need collectively to come together more than we have in the past. But I think we all do have this shared sense of purpose. But coming back to your question, it's just translating it to the ground and delivering on the detail.
Thank you. David Lloyd just posted a comment more than a question, but it actually goes again back to this point about just giving victims the support, the justice that they're demanding. David Lloyd says the 50 assaults of domestic abuse victims before they reach out is flawed research, he's writing. Okay. Evidence that out-of-court disposals work well and more swiftly. That from David Lloyd. Alex Franklin Smith, with increasing pressure and expectations to improve charge rates, are the CPS equipped to manage increasing demands from the police and make timely decisions? I mean, these both go to the heart of the sort of nub of the matter, don't they?
Yeah, well, just very quickly on DA, thank you. I'll go back on that research. There's 10 pilot areas underway at the moment, which give the police the ability to impose a conditional caution without coming back to the CPS, and the conditions will be around going on a course to address domestic abuse, and then the intention is to roll that out next year, so that all police forces will have that ability around out-of-court disposals. And sorry, just remind me of the second question.
The second question was really just with increasing pressure to improve these charge rates, is the CPS actually equipped to manage increasing demands from the police and make those decisions?
Well, look,
timely decisions.
We'd like more. Obviously, we'd like more resources. The national charging model gives us a commitment to, within custody cases, reach a charging decision within 3 hours, and then with a non-custody case, 28 days. The latest information I've got, where it's been rolled out, and it's 33 police forces, 9 CPS areas, we're hitting that in 90% of cases for custody cases and 80% overall, which I think is good. I mean, obviously it can improve. But the other thing to say is, I mean, you'll all know about CPS Direct, which is this out-of-hours service that we've got. Under this model, there'll be prosecutors throughout the country on duty from 5 o'clock in the evening until 9 a.m. the following morning. It's been going for 20 years, but we've pumped a lot more resource into that. We've changed shift patterns, and so we've increased the resource in CPS Direct. So you all have that 365 days a year, 24/7 service.
Thank you. There's a question in the centre. Bob Shelford just got his hand up. And also Alison Lowe has her hand up. So perhaps, Bob, because I'm just quite keen to squeeze in as much as possible now, if you could pass the microphone to Alison in the middle after, we'll take 2 at the same time. Fire away.
Thank you very much. Mark Shelford, Police and Crime
Sorry,
Commissioner.
Mark, not Bob. That's my...
It's all right. I answer to anybody.
So sorry.
Normally, hey you. But anyway, I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset, and it's not really a question, but more of an offer. It is absolutely about partnership. It is about teamwork. So come to God's own county of Somerset, come visit us, and I will give you chocolate biscuits. And you can have your brilliant local lead, Victoria, with you. And come and have that conversation with the Chief Constable, and let's work through some of those issues together.
Thank you very much. Of course I will. And just, can I say this? I'm wanting to get around all the CPS areas by next April. I'm told it's possible. Minimum 2-day visits. And the reason it's 2-day visits is I want to give myself enough time to meet police crime commissioners, chief constables, resident judges. So I'll do that.
Great, you've got a busy year ahead, Alison.
I'll stand up because I like to be seen. A couple of summits ago, Dame Vera Baird came here and made some quite strong allegations about the CPS, saying that the threshold had been changed in around 2015-16, particularly for rape cases. And so I ask you now, how satisfied, how confident are you that the threshold for prosecuting rape cases is right? And would you consider having a pilot that reduces that threshold, that puts victims first and guilty police second?
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. Well, this gives me an opportunity to talk about Operation Soteria and the joint national plan that we worked on with the police. I don't think the threshold changed, but we weren't doing rape investigations and prosecutions well. The new approach is suspect-centred. I think there's too much focus on, will this case stand up, will the victim's evidence stand up? It's now suspect-centred. There's been a huge amount of training for the police, CPS, and also the bar. And actually, in the last 2 years, we've more than doubled the number of cases referred by the police to us and the number of cases going to court. I can give you a hard statistic. In the latest quarter, 599 rape prosecutions were charged, as against 254 2 years ago. So it sometimes takes a while for public consciousness to catch up with the good things that we're doing. But that is a good thing that we're doing. The national plan was fully rolled out by July this year. One of my big priorities is to continue to focus on rape and serious sexual offences. and also domestic abuse going down the line. But it's a really good example of the way the CPS and the police have worked together to deliver concrete improvements.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question, Alison. Question from, guess who, Jonathan Jardine. He's been very avid. What actions or changes would help improve police file, build quality and consistencies while reducing the resources required? And it was interesting, one of the ideas raised by the Shadow Home Secretary this morning was around reassessing redaction of files, for example. It's clearly something that Labour are considering. In this, we've got this time next year we could have a change of government. What do you say in response to that?
We didn't really go into criminal justice units, did we? So on redactions, look, there's a lot of work going on around this. I attended a ministerial round table, talking to the Chief Constable for Bedfordshire earlier on about this tool called Riven. Which dramatically reduces the burden on police in relation to redaction. But more generally, I really want to plug criminal justice units for two reasons. First of all, they can take away from frontline policing jobs that frontline police officers do not need to do. They're not trained for. There's a lot of administrative work around criminal justice, which people can do. And the thing is, you can train a police constable to redact a file. If they're anything like me, they'll keep that in their head for about 48 hours, and then they'll forget it. But actually, they only do between 1 and 4 cases a year, and so a lot of the training is wasted. If you've got people doing redaction, for instance, over and over and over again, they're going to do it much more efficiently. And I could say that about a huge amount of work that potentially could be done by criminal justice units. And the other thing, of course, going back to the pragmatic issues about being able to speak to police officers, CJUs are their point of contact. They are a link. So I'm going big on criminal justice units. I know there's a funding issue around this, and it's been referred to already. And I will certainly make the case that I think that the police need to be given the resources to staff up those units in order to enable frontline policing to be more effective. There's absolutely no point in recruiting a frontline police officer and then they have to spend the whole of their shift preparing a file to go to the CPS. It's not the way we should be using our police, and there are other ways we can get around it.
We're nearly at our full time, but I suppose all of these questions come against the backdrop of such a tight financial regime that we know, because of the strictures that this government operates under and the next government, whichever that is, will still continue. We know that it's still going to be tight financially. Yeah. What is at cost for criminal justice in this country if you don't get the resources that you say you need for some of these projects?
Well, ultimately, justice won't be delivered and public confidence will diminish even further. I think, delivering justice independently and fairly is one of the most important areas of the public sector. And I think it's right up there. So I will be, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this job. So I will be making that case, as well as being DPP, I'm a permanent secretary. So I can get into the room with the decision makers, not just ministers, but senior civil servants. And I'll be making that case. I know there's conflicting priorities around, but we haven't had time to talk about operational independence. But I'm going to tie the two things together, really, because an effective police force and an effective prosecution service helps to deliver the stability that this country needs in order that we can thrive. And so what we do, the job that we do, is absolutely interrelated with what being part of a free and democratic and healthy society is all about. So all I can say is there's a very strong case. I know there are other priorities as well, but I will be, and I'm sure we will be, making the case for criminal justice.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been fascinating to range over these subjects with you, and I know it's your first interview, so for you to be here at this summit and share these thoughts with everybody attending here and online, I think is hugely valued. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure everybody will wish you all the best in the role as you take it forward. Thank you, Stephen Parkinson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.